When I look at the Trump Nelk Boys thing or with Lex Friedman or whatever, he's lying out of his ass and misstating facts and figures and nobody's fact checking it, but it doesn't matter. He hung out. It was primarily unscripted, and it just seems like a better group to be a part of than the one that Kamala Harris was offering.
David Pakman went on Chris Cuomo's show, and yeah, this one actually got spicy. David Pakman started calling out the real issues the Democrats are facing, and Chris Cuomo was trying to hold his ground, but it wasn't landing. You can tell David Pakman came prepared. It's rare you see Chris Cuomo get pushed like this, but David Pakman didn't let up. Let's check this out.
But remember, that's all secondary to economic realities. And where the Democrats have lost traction, and this is a really interesting challenge for your generation of, let's say, of thought leaders, okay, is you guys don't come from the campaign experience. Most of you don't even come from the reporting experience. So you are in the ideas business. And the reality of politics is persuasion based on practicality. So people don't give a shit how good Trump is with Theo Von if they can't pay their rent. And if he's on the right side of their rent, then they don't, again, care how he is. Biden's problem was he owned the status quo, and the status quo was lacking from a price economy perspective. Now, there were plenty of reasons.
Let me ask about that, though, Chris.
Go ahead.
Because I think I agree that the perception of the economy hurt Biden.
Yes.
But let's start not with the perception. Let's start with the reality. Which economic metrics would you point to say that under Biden, things were not good?
Rate of inflation. That became the metric.
Down to 2.9% by the end of Biden's presidency.
Right, but what does that mean? That the rate of increase in prices had slowed. Yes. I want prices to go down, not to go up more slowly. You lose on that analysis.
So let's dig into that. This really is my background, economics. If you start to see prices going down, what would be the rational consumer decision with regard to purchases? If you say prices went down, what are you going to do now?
Buy more.
Why?
Because prices are lower and I'm a consumer.
But if you expect prices to continue down, the rational economic actor would say, I'll wait till things are even cheaper.
Not in America. But I agree with you. In terms of an indifference curve, yes. But in terms of what we do, remember, there's something you have to build into this that isn't semantics, and I'm not just playing one finance background to another, is Americans overspend more than any other developed culture. Our reliance on credit is crazy. So most people, you're right, David Pakman's right. When prices go down, you stay on the sidelines and you wait, and the trend is your friend. But in America, they buy themselves all the way down and they buy themselves all the way up because they're borrowing most of the time that they're doing it. And that's why they're so price sensitive.
The point I'm trying to make, Chris, is in a country like the United States, and with an economy as mature as ours, to see raw price reductions, you only really see it when the economy is in disastrous shape.
All right, so this part right here, David Pakman and Chris Cuomo start going back and forth on the economy. And honestly, Pakman makes a solid point. The numbers under Biden weren't terrible. Inflation came down. Unemployment was low, but none of that mattered. Chris Cuomo was like, people don't care if the data looks good if they still feel broke. And he's right. But then David Pakman pushes it further. Like, okay, if prices had actually gone down, we'd be in a full-blown economic collapse. And most voters don't get that. The big takeaway, it's all about perception. People felt like the economy sucked, so it sucked. Doesn't matter what the data says. And here's where David Pakman really nails it. Kamala Harris actually had a decent message. She wanted to go after price gouging, especially at grocery stores. Super popular idea. But the second corporate media and big business pushed back, she dropped it. That's the problem. The GOP leans into their message. Even when it's garbage, Democrats have good ideas and still run from them. Like, bro, stick with it. If people like it, own it. David Pakman laid that out, and Chris Cuomo couldn't really say much to counter it.
And
Fair
so I
point.
think that, again, it's perception. When we would go and ask Trump voters at a rally, what do you want to see with prices? And they go, I want nominal prices lower than before the pandemic. They don't realize if that happened, we would be in an economic collapse,
Right.
the likes of which you can't imagine.
100%. But you are, this is your post-truth point. But it's always been true in politics, which is perception beats reality.
I agree.
And when you are the insurgent, you attack the status quo. And
Yes.
Trump, what's his name? Reagan's guy came up with the best deceptive metric in history. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? How? How could you be better off than 4 years ago when everything keeps getting more expensive? It was always a really convenient metric, but it works in politics. And the real reason that Biden lost was he couldn't explain it away. And that's
I agree.
a big thing in politics.
I think my point is, I agree with you that the perception of the economy killed Kamala Harris's campaign. I challenge the notion that it was the reality of the economy, but I agree that it was the perception. And it was also the perception that there was not a serious handling of crime and immigration. Reality, crime rate continues to decline in the United States. On average, Oklahoma City is more dangerous than New York City. The state of Oklahoma is more dangerous than the state of New York, right? So those are the facts. Doesn't matter. When it seemed as though Harris was not taking it seriously, it hurt her. And perception is greater than reality.
This part is actually super important. David Pakman brings up crime and he's dead, right? The numbers show crime has been going down for decades. Yeah, there was a little spike during COVID, but overall, we're way safer than people think. But Chris Cuomo points out something that's sadly true: perception beats reality. And Republicans are masters at using that. They talk about cities like San Francisco and New York like it's the purge out there. But nobody mentions that places like Columbus or Oklahoma City, red state cities, have worse crime rates. David Pakman called that out directly, and honestly, not enough people do. The right has built this whole image of Democrats being soft on crime, and it works even when it's false. And then you've got voters saying, well, I don't care what the stats say, I feel unsafe. That's the exact problem. David Pakman nailed it here. Republicans lean into fear and Democrats keep playing catch up. Chris Cuomo kind of agreed, but you can tell he wasn't ready for how deep that messaging game goes.
And whether it's you or Brian Tyler Cohen on the left, or Ezra Klein, you know, there are a group of, I think you guys are like the new cognoscenti, and you are up against guys who are all raw masculinity, even if they don't personify it. Like, you know, these guys, the big names on the right, whether it's Benny Johnson or Tim Pool or Tucker Carlson, I don't look at those guys and think alpha male. I do believe that they're right to fight for the alpha male. There's nothing wrong with that. It should be an inclusive thing. You can be any kind of man you want. There's no kind of man that's good. There's no kind of man that's bad unless you are bad to others. And then no matter what you are, you're bad. But you guys are brain versus brawn on some nominal level that I think is a false comparison, but that's what it is. And it's who can amplify message more. And how do you see yourself within that space, which I guess is an echo machine?
Well, I've talked about a lot of, this isn't in the book now, but in the last couple of months, I've explored how it has become that this sort of manosphere has become coded with messages that overlap with Republican ideology. And it doesn't make a lot of sense the way you're pointing out. You know, a lot of it is traits that we didn't used to consider masculine, and now we do, and it's gotten all wrapped up. But part of it is, you've got to give them credit, they've seized on, there hasn't been a super coherent and attractive model of masculinity put forward by what we might call the left. Now, what the left is, I don't know, it's loosely defined. But I think the point that I made is people like a Barack Obama or a Scott Galloway, I think are very interesting models of masculinity from what we would call the left. But that is not really the way that it has been presented in media. And so if you're online looking for either workout content or I want to start wholesaling real estate or whatever, all this stuff that's big on social media, next thing you know, it's all coded with pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And then it's only one more step until anti-abortion. And then Trump's sitting there hanging out for 2 hours. That's the funnel. And it works really well, partially because the right is organized, but partially because the left hasn't put forward a good alternative model.
The right dominates alternative media spaces. It always has. It did with pamphlets, newsletters, radio, social media, digital media. Why? Magnified minorities. That's always been the sweet spot for people on the right. The question is, what is the counter for people on the left?
Well, you're forgetting one major reason why they've succeeded. I mean, if you go back to the start of talk radio and religious broadcasters, a lot of right-wing radio started with church stations. Those were funded by super rich national organizations that just said, start a local one, get a license. It's very similar to what's going on right now. We don't have Turning Point USA on the left. We don't have the Daily Wire on the left. The Midas Touch guys are growing very quickly, so maybe they could become that, right? But we just don't have that.
This last part's probably my favorite. David Pakman really lays it out. He and Chris Cuomo start talking about how the right completely dominates these media spaces, YouTube, podcasts, TikTok, and how they've tied masculinity to politics in a weird but effective way. And Pakman's right. A lot of the manosphere stuff online, eventually leads guys into politics. You start with gym content or money talk, then boom, suddenly you're watching someone rant about cancel culture and telling you to vote Trump. It's all connected. Chris Cuomo makes a good point too. He's like, most of these dudes aren't even masculine. And honestly, facts. Like, a lot of these right-wing influencers are corny as hell crybaby vibes, but the branding works. What David Pakman says that hits hard, though, is the money part. The right has huge donors, think tanks, full-on media machines backing them. Turning Point, Daily Wire, all that. The left, not even close. There's no real pipeline for creators who want to push progressive messages. That's why guys like David Pakman grind so hard, they're doing this with way less backing. And the second someone on the left starts talking about taxing billionaires or regulating corporations, the funding disappears. It's not just about content, it's about power. The right builds infrastructure, the left builds vibes, and that's why the left keeps falling behind online. David Pakman sees that. Chris Cuomo kind of dances around it, but Pakman said it straight. Anyway, what do you think? Who do you agree with more here? David Pakman or Chris Cuomo? Drop a comment. I actually read them. Hit like, if you're feeling this breakdown and if you want more real takes like this, go ahead and subscribe. See you in the next one.